A senior US envoy has revealed that the latest version of a peace plan proposed by the United States has been rejected by both of Sudan's warring factions. That's the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces and the country's army. President Trump said last week that he would bring an end to the conflict, which erupted in 2023 over a power struggle and which has led to ethnically motivated mass killings, mass displacement and nationwide famine. Sudan's army has denounced the participation of the United Arab Emirates in peace talks because of their alleged role in arming the RSF. Here in Europe, the European Parliament is discussing a ban on the sale of weapons to Abu Dhabi in an effort to stop them being used in Sudan.
There's growing evidence in Sudan that the United Arab Emirates is supplying weapons to the RSF, a paramilitary that has allegedly executed and tortured thousands of civilians. The UAE denies that it arms the RSF, despite compelling evidence provided by the United Nations and rights groups. Why have the UAE's allies in Europe and the US been silent for so long? Analysts say financial interests play a role.
The UAE are seen, unfortunately, as an ATM by most European governments who want tens of billions, if not more, worth of investments into their countries.
Whether it's a new AI center in France, an investment deal with Italy, or football clubs in the UK, the UAE has proven to be a big spender. It's also pumping billions of dollars into U.S. industries and real estate.
They invested over $2 billion in a cryptocurrency exchange that is owned by the Trump family, the Trump Corporation. They've actually committed to investing over $1 trillion in the U.S. economy over the next 10 years, which is a staggering number.
Then there's the profit coming from arms sales.
Washington sells a great deal of weapons and other advanced weapon systems to the UAE.
Major arms deals were already being made during the Biden administration, and Trump has further approved a $1.6 billion sale to the UAE earlier this year. A lot of the UAE's weapons also come from Europe.
The UAE is a very big spender, particularly in France.
A deal signed in 2021 where the UAE ordered 80 fighter jets from France was France's largest ever weapons contract for export.
The money that they invest, which are tens of billions of dollars, is a very, very important influx of investment in this part of European industry and secures jobs.
Investigations by journalists and rights groups suggest that some weapons or parts manufactured by the UK and France ended up in the hands of RSF fighters via the UAE. And even though there's a UN arms embargo on Sudan, there's none on the UAE.
The UAE is a very, very important buyer of Western arms, and beggars can't be choosers. So, if you want these investments from the UAE, you need to kind of keep the UAE on side.
Then there's the issue of energy security. Not only is the UAE one of the world's biggest oil exporters, with leverage over the oil markets, it's also investing billions in developing renewable energy. It's launched trade talks with the EU this year and aims to export green hydrogen.
Energy interdependence between Europe and the Gulf is deepening, especially as Europe is kind of pivoting away from Russia.
The West also sees the UAE as an important security partner in the region.
Since the Arab Spring, we've seen the Europeans and also the Americans gradually withdrawing from the Middle East and delegating that sort of security provision to local partners. And one of these local partners is the UAE.
In 2024, the U.S. designated the UAE as a major defense partner, the only country with such recognition after India. This year, the U.S. has sold defense weapons to the UAE worth billions of dollars. The UAE hosts Jebel Ali Port in Dubai, which is the U.S. Navy's largest port of call in the Middle East.
Washington has been, very vocal in their praise of the UAE and the alignment of U.S. national security interests with the UAE.
Those ties could make any peacemaking efforts by President Trump and the UAE's Western allies more complicated and could make stemming the flow of weapons to the RSF more difficult.
Hager is a political scientist and research fellow at the Giga Institute for Middle East Studies in the German city of Hamburg. Welcome to DW. Good to have you here. There are any number of UN and NGO reports documenting the fact that these weapons get from the UAE to the RSF in Sudan. Perhaps you could talk us through how they end up there.
So the United Arab Emirates is a bit of a turntable when it comes to funneling weapons into Sudan. In general, Sudan is already embedded in quite a wide ecosystem of weapons that get into the country. But the United Arab Emirates are kind of a reliable direct supply lines that transports weapons often indirectly. So not directly from the Emirates to Sudan, but often via Chad, via Libya, and through different subcontractors that it uses to keep the chain of accountability and also the supply line as murky as possible. And that has been the role and also the effectiveness of the UAE's weapon supplies, that it never goes the direct route, that it uses transit countries, that it bounces weapons around as well. And more importantly, that it also never quite or only supplies its own equipment, but rather takes equipment it has been supplied from elsewhere to further confuse that supply line.
Okay. And why? What's in it for the UAE?
For the UAE, it's especially in the war in Sudan, it's the access to gold, and the collapse of the central government and the very chaotic situation makes it very easy to access the gold under market prices and to get a steady supply under conditions that may have less of an administrative hassle, especially if it can just be smuggled out. It's also a vehicle to further the cooperation, for example, with Russia, and which also has a vested interest in the gold trade in the country to finance its own war in Ukraine. So having kind of a shared interest is a good incentive to cooperate, to back channel together and to access gold in this very chaotic situation.
So Western governments have been reluctant to pressure the UAE over its role in this conflict. Do you believe that pressure, that they know about what's going on and that pressure therefore follows? Or do you believe that they actually have legitimate reasons for not applying the pressure to Abu Dhabi?
I mean, currently the chain of proving that the United Arab Emirates, it's very difficult to prove it beyond the shadow of doubt. And as long as that's the case, as long as it's as murky as possible, it buys time on both sides. It buys time for the United Arab Emirates to establish and to enmesh itself into the economic interest, which raises the stakes of actually putting pressure on the United Arab Emirates. And on the other hand, for the European Union, which has a vested interest in especially renewable energy and free trade with the Gulf countries, as long as there is uncertainty, they can evade voter pressure and public pressure to also then in turn put pressure on the United Arab Emirates.
And why would they want to evade that pressure? Is this about money? Is this about UAE investment?
It is. It goes across multiple sectors in the economy, and one of which is, of course, renewable energy, especially green hydrogen. And because of Europe's dependency or deepening dependency on the United Arab Emirates, the stakes are incredibly high. And Russia, we know there is a buildup of Russian military capacities at NATO's Eastern Front. So there is no foreseeable change or major change, geopolitical change at Europe's Eastern Front. So it is important to uphold that relation for as long as possible, especially as security priorities in the European Union have shifted and are preparing for a Russian buildup and more actions, military actions towards other EU member states.
So if the EU did ultimately impose a complete ban on arms sales to the UAE, what sort of impact would that have on the RSF's ability to continue its fight?
One thing we can absolutely not forget is that the actors in Sudan, especially the rapid support forces, and in a certain way the United Arab Emirates as well, they have anticipated sanctions. It's not the first time that there have been arms embargoes on both for very different reasons in the past. But what we've seen with the United Arab Emirates in the past 2 years is that they have massively diversified their suppliers in an attempt to modernize their own armies. And it's similar for the rapid support forces that have kept their supply lines as diversified as possible. The United Arab Emirates stands out as one major supplier that has been reliable, that has been able to act very quickly and contribute to the very quick advance of the rapid support forces in Sudan. But it's not the only one, precisely because you wouldn't want to, as a fighting source that has to sustain combat over a long time, wouldn't want to be completely dependent on one particular supplier. And then again, there's the already existing network of arms trafficking that is already happening in the entire region. So there may be weapons funneled via Mali, via Niger into the country. So even if there wouldn't be weapons or equipment coming in from the United Arab Emirates, the RSF already has a number of sources it can pursue. And then one thing that's also incredibly important to note is that in terms of the weapons that pose a danger to civilians, the damage is already done because those weapons have already been in circulations for decades.
Okay. The interests are always complicated in these sort of situations. So we talk about the European interest in UAE investment, but there's growing concern in Brussels about a potential new refugee influx from Sudan via Libya. So there's one now and a potential hazard in the future. How real is that risk?
In general, that's a very interesting shift because the immediacy of the crisis in Sudan has often been assessed by how likely refugee influxes are within Europe. And that has been a deciding factor on whether or not it's important to invest and prioritize it in foreign policy and conflict management. So this is fairly new. The risk is not particularly high. There are a number, tens of thousands asylum applicants, but fairly early in the conflict. The European Union has also invested in migration management, especially in Egypt, in preventing migration flows in making it towards Europe and sort of externalizing European Union borders. There have been similar agreements, there have been similar investments in migration management in Chad, which is also a country in which a lot of migrants from Sudan would flee. And there's especially focus on the rest of Western Africa, because of the recent military coups, that migration should be managed and should be managed long before it reaches the European borders. So that's also very difficult, not very likely, especially because measures have already been in place to limit refugee flows towards Europe.
That's very clear. Thank you so much for talking us through that. Hager Ali from the Giga Institute for Middle East Studies.
Thank you.
Let's explore this with Nele Riehl, who is a member of the European Parliament. She represents the Progressive Volt Party and advocates for human rights and arms control. Welcome to DW. Do you believe the EU is turning a blind eye to the UAE's role in arming the RSF in Sudan?
Yes, I do not only believe that, I know that for sure. I'm just coming from plenary because today we had our debate, our very first debate here in the plenary to this extent on this topic. And it was crystal clear that all the progressive parties in this European Parliament really do want to call out the UAE, but other parties are not so, I would say, they bold, because of course it's not easy. Of course, I totally understand there's also other countries involved, that's for sure. Nevertheless, we need to call out the UAE, and we, as I said, we are very standing strong on that. Today, we were also working on our resolution, and we didn't manage the progressive parties to actually have that wording in there, because, of course, it's all about the money. It's about the free trade negotiations going on. So conservative parties didn't want to agree that we really need to have this wording in there.
So you talk about wanting to call out the UAE. Shouldn't you also be calling out the European Union for turning this blind eye?
Absolutely, and I am. We've been witnessing genocidal actions for 2 years now, and we've been staying silent for too long. Of course, last year the Council, for the first time, was speaking up. As I said, having a plenary debate to this extent today was the very first time after 2 years. I'm always ashamed to say so. This is not what I personally, as a member of the European Parliament, stand for. It's a bit, I would say, we're kind of so used to that there's something going on in Africa, and we're so used to, starvation over there. And this is really the shame that we now, as the European Union, need to take action and not take that as a given. But also, it's not our fault this is happening, of course, but we need to take responsibility now and preventing a genocide like all these, what we see right now, to go even further.
Given the importance of UAE investments to Europe, do you think it's realistic to demand and actually get a freeze on trade agreements with Dubai?
This is not about what's realistic, but this is about saving lives right now. People are starving right now. People are dying right now. So we need to put pressure on the UAE. I don't see any other way. Of course, there's other ways that we can, as a European Union, involve and make sure that there is a way to peace, such as sanctions on the important people over there. That is also something we do now have in the resolutions. So there's, of course, other steps to take. But yeah, we need to insist on this, on calling out the UAE.
OK, so truthfully, really, do you expect the European Union to ban trade with the United Arab Emirates, despite your best efforts?
As I said, very truthfully, the progressive parties in this House were very clear in what we demand. But we don't have a majority. So that's what we're working towards. Right now, to be very blunt and very honest, I don't see that coming, because there's lots of different interests, as I had it before. There's money involved, of course. So that is why I'm being a little bit pessimistic. As I said before, we still, of course, still are being pessimistic in this regard doesn't mean that we can keep silent in other regards. We still have to work towards peace.
Thank you so much for talking us through that, Nele. Nele Riehl, member of the European Parliament.